Adrian called Sina perfect, right in the middle of the ballroom as if everyone else had vanished. His voice stayed in that familiar low tone, the kind he used when he wanted his words to carry farther than they needed to. Then he tilted his head and offered her his hand for a dance. It all happened so neatly that I knew he'd rehearsed the line before he walked in. He didn't see me. The lights behind me pulled my shadow into the dark. I stood still, without a hint of jealousy or a skipped heartbeat. I just watched, sharp and clear, as if I were seeing a scene I already knew by heart. What changed the air wasn't the compliment. It was the way Adrian used the exact words he once threw at me. Natural. Easy. Not complicated. Words he said to me in a different tone. Like criticism. Like he wanted me to try harder to be someone he could show off. But now those same words turned into praise for a woman he'd barely known. I didn't feel offended. I only saw the intention. This was a test, a reaction check, a game to see how far he could push me. Sina hesitated for a moment at Adrian's invitation, but she still placed her hand in his. Her smile was light and polite, without any hint of intent. She had no idea where she stood in this little game, and that made the scene feel even colder. When Adrian led her toward the center of the floor, that was when I stepped out of the dark. I didn't call his name. I didn't make a sound. I just walked into the light where it hit straight on. Adrian saw me the moment he turned his head. His eyes stalled for a beat, long enough for me to know he understood that I knew exactly what he was doing. And the worst thing for someone like Adrian isn't being caught. It's being seen through while he's trying to stay in control. I didn't say anything. No raised chin, no accusation, just a steady, quiet look. That silence made him blink, like he felt something colder than the air in the room. Then I turned away. But the real story started 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks before the party, Adrian started changing in a way that wasn't loud but was obvious. He replied to my messages slower than usual, sometimes leaving them for hours, then saying things like, "I'm busy, don't be so sensitive." Not an explanation, just shifting the blame. Light, but intentional. When I didn't react, he brought up another coworker, someone I'd never met, in a vague way. "She's really easygoing, doesn't care about small stuff." I knew that line. It wasn't an introduction. It was a comparison. Another test. I didn't ask anything. Not who. Not, why would you say that? I just looked at him long enough that he had to turn his face away. Adrian wasn't used to my silence. He was used to conversations where he set the pace. When I didn't move to his rhythm, he started getting restless. Then came the moment he told a story about another woman at the gym, adding, "See, that's what a confident woman looks like." His tone sounded casual on purpose, but there was an edge to it. Part of me wanted to ask why he needed to use someone else as a benchmark for me, but I didn't. I just stayed quiet and looked at him a little longer. Longer than last time. That silence got to him in a way words couldn't. Adrian was used to winning every interaction. He spoke, people responded, he set the pace, others followed. But with me, during those 3 weeks, he got nothing. No reaction, no jealousy, no questions, no confusion, no cracking, just clarity. And that bothered him more than anything. Because for a man who needs to feel in control, not being able to measure someone's emotions is the most unsettling thing. I realized the conflict didn't start at the party. It started when Adrian felt my silence was stronger than any reaction he tried to trigger. When he realized I no longer revolved around him the way I once did. When he decided he needed a bigger test, a public one, to force a response out of me. That's why Sina showed up. I didn't know much about her beyond a few polite greetings. She was gentle, soft-spoken, but not clueless, easy to like, and most importantly, she had no idea Adrian was using her as a tool in an emotional test, where he was the only one actually playing. And me? I don't chase attention. I don't talk much. I watch. I move slower than most people, but I never lose my way. And Adrian? He's used to winning, used to creating situations, pushing other people's emotions into the shape he wants. He didn't realize my calm wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I could see the entire structure of the game he was building, and I refused to step inside it. So when I watched Adrian turn with Senna in the middle of the party, everything from the past 3 weeks slid into place like a complete picture. I knew this wasn't a spontaneous moment. It was a stage he'd set, but he didn't account for one thing. When a man tries to control someone through emotional reactions, the only way to break the game is not to react at all. And when I stepped into the light and looked straight at him, I saw it clearly. He wasn't just stunned because he saw me. He was stunned because the test he set up was slipping out of his hands. That night, after the party, I went home first. I didn't say anything to Adrian. I didn't ask why he chose to say those words in front of a crowd. I didn't need to. I'd already seen everything I needed in his eyes when he froze on the dance floor. His insecurity was so obvious it didn't need analysis. And my silence, the thing he thought would make me weaker, was the very thing knocking him off balance. In the days that followed, Adrian pushed harder. With everyone he talked to, he found a way to bring up Sina. Not in a way that looked inappropriate to outsiders, but in the way of a man trying to plant a message. I noticed her. Just subtle enough that no one could call him out, but sharp enough that I heard it loud and clear. When I still didn't react, he got irritated. One night while we were eating, he said, "I honestly don't know what you're thinking anymore." He said it like it was my fault, like I owed him my emotions so he could manage them more easily. I just looked at him, calm enough that he had to turn his face away. Then came a dinner with a few mutual friends. Sina was there too. When someone complimented the food, Adrian looked at Sina and said, "She's very perceptive. Women who pay attention like that are rare." There was no reason for that line to be there. It was misplaced in the exact way he wanted, aimed at me, spoken to someone else. I didn't get jealous. I didn't feel lesser. I just felt another small cut, tiny but sharp. And the funny part was that Senna had no idea she was being used as an example in a test only 2 people in that room were playing, and the only one who didn't know was her. She turned to me with a soft smile. "You're really likable. I feel like you're always peaceful." I nodded. There was no reason for her to get caught in the crossfire of Adrian's experiment. I didn't blame Sina. She only happened to be there at the moment Adrian needed someone to trigger a reaction, and she was sweet enough for him to choose her. The unfair part was this. I was being tested in a game I never agreed to play, and Sina was pulled in simply because she was nearby. Adrian noticed I wasn't saying anything, and that bothered him more. To him, silence was the failure of his plan. He couldn't measure me, and that unsettled him more than any argument could. One evening at home, Adrian set his glass down harder than necessary. He looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Don't you think anything is strange?" I knew what he wanted. A question, a hint of jealousy, a trembling voice. Anything he could use to confirm that his presence still had weight in my world. But I didn't give him that. I answered simply, "I just see you trying to do something." The calm in my voice made him pause. My answer wasn't in the script he had imagined. He wanted to see me flustered. He wanted me defensive. He wanted me to ask, "Do you like her?" But I didn't say anything close to what he expected. And when someone used to control doesn't get the result they want, their confusion is often louder than shouting. Adrian turned away, but I could see his jaw tighten. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. And that disappointment wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at his inability to stir anything in me. Senna showed up again a few days later at a small gathering. She didn't do anything wrong, but her presence made the whole situation heavier. She handed me a small gift, a scented candle, and said, "You're really gentle. I like the way you talk. It's very soft. Her words caught me off guard because they were so genuine, like she was complimenting someone she thought was a safe mirror. Meanwhile, Adrian stood a few steps away watching us. His eyes didn't show jealousy. They showed disappointment. Because what he wanted, the contrast between me and Sina, wasn't forming the way he planned. Sina accidentally ruined his test by liking me, by being kind to me, by not creating the tension he was hoping for. I started to see it clearly. The issue was never Sina. She was just the prop Adrian placed on the table to measure how much I cared. The issue was that Adrian didn't know how to feel valued unless he could see someone reacting to him. That was the dark corner in him I hadn't noticed before. A form of insecurity dressed up as confidence. A man who needs someone to waver so he can feel like he still has impact. A man who needs a game to fill the empty space inside, yet thinks that game is normal communication. Each small cut didn't hurt me. They only made me clearer, made me see his structure for what it was. And what made me cold wasn't the hurt. It was realizing Adrian was pushing himself into the very position he feared most, the person seeking validation, not the one who has it. By the end of that week, I knew one thing for sure. This test wouldn't stop unless I ended it. But I also knew arguing wasn't the way. When someone is chasing a reaction, any reaction becomes a reward. I wasn't going to give him that reward. I didn't need to raise my voice for him to hear me. I just needed him to see the truth about himself, not through my words, but through the way his own actions reflected back at him. The party was only the beginning. I knew Adrian had planned something bigger, more public, because he believed the small attempts weren't enough to measure me. But what he didn't know was that I'd already seen everything. And this time, I would be the one to end the game. The music in the ballroom shifted to a slower song. The lights softened, landing right on Adrian and Sina standing in the center. I stood a few steps away, not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to catch every move he made. Adrian held Sina's hand lightly, as if he wanted to appear delicate, but that delicacy was for show, not connection. I could see he kept angling his head away from me, not because he didn't know I was there, but because he wanted to believe I'd left, that I was somewhere in a corner, shaken, trying to hide the emotion he hoped to see. He believed I was hurt. He believed I was swallowing down a reaction to keep from losing dignity. He believed I still revolved around him the way I used to. That belief made him feel confident enough not to notice I was standing straighter than ever. Adrian turned with Senna across the dance floor, his eyes sweeping around the room, lingering the longest on the darker corners. He was looking for me, not to apologize, but to measure my expression. He wanted a reaction. He wanted proof. He wanted my jealousy to serve as the answer to his question about his own worth. I knew it, because I'd lived with the way he searched for validation from others for too long. He didn't love the romance of this moment. He loved the feeling of being able to create disruption in someone else. And in his mind, I was the one being disrupted. But then he turned one more time and saw me, not in the dark, not hiding, but standing in the brightest part of the room. I walked forward, steady, calm enough that even the air around me seemed to settle. No sharp heel clicks, no red eyes, no trembling lips, not a single trace of the hurt he expected. Just a silence sharper than any question. When my eyes met his steps stalled. The music kept going, but his body stopped completely, like someone had just pulled the strings off a puppet that had been performing too confidently. His hand on Sina's back tightened a little, a reflex he couldn't control. Sina tilted her head to look at him, then at me, and in that moment, I saw the shift in her eyes. Confusion first, then realization. Not the whole story, but enough to understand she had been standing in a play she didn't write. I understood all of this because I'd lived with the way he sought validation for far too long. He didn't love the romance of the moment. He loved the feeling of being able to unsettle someone, and in his mind, I was unsettled. But then he turned one more time and saw me, not in the shadows, not hiding, but standing in the brightest part of the room. I walked forward, steady and calm, enough that even the air around me felt quieter. No sharp heels hitting the floor, no red eyes, no trembling lips, not a single sign of the hurt he expected. Just a silence sharper than any question. When my eyes met his steps stalled. The music kept going, but his body stopped, like someone had just cut the strings on a puppet that had been performing too well. His hand on Sina's back tightened just a little, an involuntary reaction. Senna tilted her head, looking at him, then at me. And in that moment, I saw the shift in her expression. Confusion first, then understanding. Not the whole story, but enough to realize she'd been standing in a scene she didn't write. I didn't stop right in front of them. I stood a few steps away, close enough for them to see me clearly, but far enough that neither could speak before I did. I held my gaze steady, calm, as if I were looking through Adrian rather than at him. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. I spoke first. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed clearly for both him and Sina. You tested me, but I never played. The sentence fell into the room like someone had shut off all the background noise. Not sharp, not bitter. Just true. So true it didn't need any emotion to cut. I watched Adrian's face shift faster than he could hide it. Surprise, embarrassment, confusion. And then the worst realization of all, everything he built to control me was now reflecting straight back at him, revealing what he tried hardest to hide, his insecurity. Senna stepped back from him, not because of me, because she realized she'd been used. She wasn't naive, just caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment. She looked at Adrian with a completely different expression now, none of the gentle warmth from earlier. It was the look of someone realizing she'd been turned into a prop in a cheap performance. Adrian, what is this? Sina asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. He didn't answer, and that silence drew attention. A couple nearby stopped dancing. A man behind them glanced over. They hadn't heard the whole exchange, but they'd heard my one line. One line was enough. Adrian stood between two women, one he tried to control and one he used to do it. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw the thing he feared most show plainly on his face. He had no idea what to do. I didn't say anything else, no explanation, no lecture, no bitterness. I just stood there for 1 second, as if giving him enough time to feel exactly what he'd just lost. Not me. Control. I saw his throat move. He wanted to speak, but anything he said would expose him even more. He knew that, and he knew I knew it. That was the reveal. No shouting, no sides being taken. The truth stood on its own. Senna spoke first, her voice colder than I'd ever heard from her. You used me to test your wife's feelings? The question didn't need an answer. Adrian's silence was the answer. People around us started looking directly at him. No one laughed. No one defended him. They just looked, the kind of look that makes even confident men lose their footing. Adrian tried to keep his face steady, but I saw his hand tremble slightly. No one else noticed. But I did, because I'd spent too long standing close enough to recognize even his smallest movements. Sina shook her head, not in anger, in a disappointment so deep it didn't need more words. I stepped back, then turned. I didn't rush. I didn't storm out. I left the dance floor like someone who'd finished what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. When I walked away, what broke Adrian wasn't my words. It was the way I moved, as if there was nothing left in the story for him to hold on to. When the door closed behind me, I knew one thing clearly. His test didn't just fail. It made him the most exposed person in that entire room. Back in that moment, when I stood still in the middle of the room after speaking to him, everything felt stretched to the point of snapping. Not because I was angry, but because I did nothing. My silence startled Adrian more than any confrontation could have. He looked at me like he was waiting for a question, a complaint, any sign of emotion, something he could use to place himself back into the center of the narrative. But I didn't give him that. I stood there, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. I didn't look at Sina. I didn't look around. I looked only at him, calm, long enough to watch the panic rise behind his eyes. Adrian always thought he was good at handling conflict, but only when he was the one steering it. Now he didn't know what was coming next. He couldn't predict my next move, and for someone who thrives on control, that's the real fear. Sina was the one who broke the silence first. She stepped back from Adrian again, her expression no longer soft like the other times I'd seen her. There was clarity in her eyes now, the kind that makes a person stand a little straighter. "You used me to test your wife's reaction," Sina said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp like glass pulled too tight. The people standing nearby turned fully toward us. No one stepped in. No one gave an awkward smile. The entire room felt like it was watching a crack spread across the floor. Adrian opened his mouth to say something, but Sina cut in first, quick and clean. "You called me perfect just now for what? To provoke her? I'm not dancing with someone like that." The line, "someone like that," wasn't harsh, but it hit the exact place Adrian was weakest, the pride he always tried to build around himself. For a second, his whole face collapsed, not in a dramatic way, in the way of someone who just had a mask taken off that he believed was invisible. He stepped away from where he stood, but he didn't move toward me, and he didn't try to stop Sina. He stood between the two of us like a man trapped inside the very game he created. I still didn't say anything. I didn't step in, didn't take anyone's side, didn't turn to Sina. I let the two of them handle the part that belonged to them. That made my silence heavier, like I was the only one in the room who didn't need to prove anything. The power in the room shifted in a clear, visible way. It no longer sat with Adrian, the man losing ground to the consequences of his own actions. It wasn't with Sina, who had just stepped out of a role she never agreed to play. It was with me, the one who hadn't said a word but was controlling the emotional rhythm of the entire moment. Adrian looked at me, his eyes caught somewhere between pleading and confused. He wanted me to deny what Sina said, or at least look at him in a way that said, "You just made a small mistake." But I didn't look at him like that. I looked at him the way you look at someone who's finally learning a lesson you understood long before they did. I turned, not sharply, not with attitude, just turned as if the whole thing was already over. Adrian took half a step toward me, but he didn't dare call my name. If he called me, everyone would see his desperation even more clearly. If he stayed silent, I would walk away. He was stuck between two choices that would both cost him dignity, and that was the part he never anticipated, that the test he created would come back and strike the very place he feared being hit, his image. Sina stayed still, no longer looking at Adrian. That shook him even more. He didn't just lose power with me, he lost the admiration he thought he had from Sina. I walked toward the door, each step light, unhurried. I knew Adrian was watching me. I knew he was trying to read my posture to find some chance to recover the situation. But I didn't leave him a single sign. No turning back, no pausing, no final words. I left him standing there with the emptiness he created for himself. A man who loves control isn't afraid of being yelled at. They're afraid of silence. They're afraid of not knowing what's happening inside the woman they're trying to read. They're afraid of losing influence. When he couldn't get a reaction from me, he lost power. When he was exposed in front of others, he lost his image. But when both happened at the same time, he lost his place in the story entirely. As my hand touched the door, I heard someone in the room whisper, "What just happened?" Another voice answered, "Not sure, but he looks scared." Not scared of me, scared of what I made him face. Himself. I stepped outside and let the door close behind me. I didn't look back, because in that moment, I understood the most important thing. I wasn't leaving because I was hurt. I was leaving because there was no reason to stay in a game I never agreed to play. Adrian stayed in that room, standing under the lights, unsure whether he should try to stop me or save his pride in front of everyone. And in the end, he managed to keep neither. That night, I didn't go home right away. I took a long walk around the neighborhood, not thinking about much, just letting the cold air clear my head. When I finally returned, the house was still lit. Adrian sat on the couch, fingers laced together, back not touching the seat. The posture of a man who knows he just lost a piece of the image he'd been trying to protect for years. He stood when he saw me. "Rhea, let me explain." His voice was softer than any version of him I'd ever heard. I took off my coat, set it on the chair, and said nothing. "I just wanted to see if you still cared about me." He said it like it might soften everything, like it was the kind of confession that deserved quick forgiveness. I looked at him, steady and calm. A man who's truly confident doesn't need to test anyone. The words made him freeze, not because they were sharp, because they were true. And truth hurts most when it doesn't come with anger to distract from it. Adrian opened his mouth, but I raised a hand gently. "Don't explain anymore. You know what you did." I didn't say it to accuse him. I said it to remind him that I saw him, all the parts he tried to hide even from himself. I walked into the bedroom and placed a few essentials into a bag. Adrian stood in the doorway, not daring to step closer. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice tight with worry he was trying to hide. "I'm staying away for a few days," I said, closing the zipper. "To think." "Rhea, don't make this bigger than—" I turned and looked at him. "If you think I'm making it bigger than it is, that's exactly why I need to go." He fell silent immediately. I didn't leave because I was angry. I didn't leave to scare him into losing me. I left because I needed space to hear myself more clearly. Not his voice, not the voice of his tests, not the echoes of meaningless comparisons. I needed quiet, and I knew that only by stepping out of Adrian's orbit could I get back to my own frequency. For the next 3 days, Adrian called nonstop. Not frantic, but steady. The rhythm of someone panicking underneath. He texted saying he missed me, that he wanted to talk, that he didn't mean it, that he was just clumsy. None of those words softened me. They only confirmed what I'd seen all along. He needed my reactions to feel important in my life. I didn't reply, not to punish him, but because I didn't want to step back into the old cycle where he spoke. I soothed, he tested, I endured. I wasn't going back to that pattern again. When a man asks for forgiveness not because he wants to change, but because he's afraid of losing his power, silence is the only way he can finally see himself. On the 3rd day, Adrian sent only one message. "I honestly don't know what I've become." It was the first sentence out of all his messages that wasn't about me. It was about him. That was when I knew he'd finally seen the important part. It wasn't my leaving that scared him. It was watching the image he'd built, the confident, controlled, magnetic man, fall apart right in front of the people who saw him at the party. He'd been seen exactly as he was. No defenses, no polished confidence, no flattering spotlight. That kind of exposure weighs more than any emotional slap I could have given him. On the evening of the 4th day, I came home, not rushed, not nervous. I came back because I was clear, not because Adrian needed an answer. He opened the door the moment he heard the key. His eyes had no pride left, no tension, just the tiredness of someone who finally faced what he'd been avoiding for years. "Rhea," he said, his voice unsteady. "I'm sorry." I set my bag on the chair. "What are you sorry for?" He took a breath, like my question was the real test. Because I needed your reactions to feel valuable. Because I leaned on other people to get that feeling. Because I don't know how to love without creating drama. Because I thought your silence meant you were weak. The last sentence made me look at him more closely. For the first time, he said something completely true without any defense. I sat down, my hands resting on my lap. "You didn't lose me at the party," I said. "You lost me when you decided I was someone you could control with tests." He lowered his head, his hands tightening. "I know." I didn't stand up to comfort him. I didn't reach out to touch his shoulder. I didn't do that anymore, because my reassurance had always been the life raft he clung to, so he wouldn't have to face himself. I wasn't going to be that raft again. "Will you stay?" Adrian asked, so quietly it was almost a whisper. "I don't know," I said. "But I do know I won't stay if everything keeps revolving around your need for validation." It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, clear, calm, solid. Adrian lifted his head, his eyes red but not from anger. "I'll change." I looked at him once more, then stood. "You don't need to change for me. You need to change because you can't live your whole life fearing other people won't react." He exhaled, a long breath like his body was finally admitting the truth he'd been running from. I looked at him one last time before walking to the bedroom. No promises, no final verdict, just one line, cold, honest, and the last thing he needed to hear. "I don't need you to change. I just won't stay somewhere I'm treated like a test." I closed the door. Not hard, not soft, just enough for him to understand that what was between us ended here. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do isn't reacting. It's walking away from a place where we're no longer respected. Calm is the clearest boundary of all. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening. If you were in my situation, when would you have chosen to leave? Share your thoughts below. I always appreciate every comment. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Thank you for being here and supporting me. It truly means a lot.